Okay, so it'd be something of a mistake to think of these questions about artificial intelligence and thinking machines are questions that have risen only recently in the wake of the interwebs and our smartphones and so forth. Back in 1950, the very famous logician, computer scientist, philosopher Alan Turing wrote a paper called Can Machines Think? And in it, he argues that the distinction that we make between the thoughts that our brains produce, that constitute our minds, and the products of computers that are produced through software are really, in essence, the same. That we may label them differently. We might call the products of our brains sort of real intelligence or real thoughts, and the products of computers artificial intelligence. But Turing says if they're in essence the same thing, then the distinction that you're making with these different terms is a distinction without a difference. In other words, yes, they're different terms, but they don't really, in essence, refer to anything that is all that different. And to make this argument, Turing proposes what's now called the Turing test. And Turing says, look, if you can set up a situation where you have somebody who's able to be an interrogator of another person, but they're interrogating them in a mediated fashion, for example, through a computer, and you can have that interrogator offering the same questions to a machine that's not being operated by a person, and the interrogator can't tell the difference between the quality of the responses that the human being and the machine are offering, then who cares who's offering the response? They're essentially the same thing. So you have the interrogator asking a question, a human being types that response to the question in another computer, and the algorithm here, the artificial intelligence in the other computer, does the exact same thing. And Turing's claim was, look, this test about intelligence, it'll be passed. My argument will be made if or proven if a computer is mistaken for a human being more than 30% of the time during a series of 5-minute keyboard conversations. Okay, and it's said, there's a little bit of controversy about this, but it's claimed that a computer program called Eugene Goostman, which simulates a 13-year-old Ukrainian boy, is said to have passed this test. And so what Turing is saying is, if you can't tell the difference between the information provided to you by a human being and the information provided to you by a computer, then the information is really the same thing in its essence. If it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And so you might think about this as it relates to your own experiences with artificial intelligence like ChatGPT or X's Grok. They can be pretty good at simulating human beings and human thought. In fact, I think Grok now has a feature where you can choose the kind of experience that you want to have. They've kind of programmed in very distinct personalities into the AI so that it'll interact with you in different kinds of ways. I think Grok has one called unhinged mode or something like that, and that's this really salty sort of vulgar kind of personality that is still that's interacting with you in via the computer, but it's interacting with you in what seems to be a very distinct human-like personality. And one of the other things you might notice about artificial intelligence, or might have noticed, is that it's getting better. It's pretty good at simulating the kinds of products that human beings would offer to us in response to our questions. And we've gotten to the point now where the artificial intelligence is using itself to improve itself, so that every second of every day, these AI programs are using their power to increase their power. And the thinking of artificial intelligence philosophers and computer scientists is that at some point soon, the power of AI is going to be so great that it will be able to very quickly exponentially increase its intelligence and its power into what they are terming super intelligence. And that's what scares some people and what excites some other people. Now, the question for us is this, is that if the products of AI are indistinguishable from the products of human beings, how does that bear on the relative moral status of thinking people and thinking machines? And what Nick Bostrom, the philosopher who wrote the piece you're reading for this thought primer, says, Nick Bostrom says, when we think about moral status and whether or not something falls within the circle of moral considerability, we usually think about one of two things, or maybe both things. One of those things is sentience. Right? That we say that something that has the capacity for phenomenal experience, or what's termed qualia, such as the capacity to feel pain and suffer, these are things that fall within the circle of moral considerability. right? So this is very kind of utilitarian thinking. If something has the ability to experience pain or pleasure, then that thing is distinct from something like an ink pen, which doesn't have that capacity for experience. The other quality that Bostrom says can cause something to fall within the circle of moral considerability is sapience, right? And it's this set of capacities associated with higher intelligence, such as self-awareness, consciousness, being a reason-responsive agent, okay? And so we recognize that this is what causes us to say that human beings are not just things like ink pens, that human beings have moral status either because they can feel pain and pleasure and have these experiences of the world, or because they have this very sophisticated rational capacity for making sense of the world and thinking about it. And this is what causes us to say that even something like cats, or maybe even a goldfish, that these also fall within the circle of moral considerability, right? Because they have this ability to have experiences of either consciousness or pleasure and pain, or both. And so, of course, the question for us is, well, what if AI has that higher level ability, this one referred to here as sapience, it has higher intelligence that human beings have? Wouldn't that mean that the AI and the computers that run AI would have some sense of moral status that we would have to recognize?